Do you remember last year when two highly anticipated movies, Barbie and Oppenheimer, released on the same day? This became known as Barbenheimer, and it took the internet by storm. Plenty of movies have come out on the same day before. It was the stark contrast between these two that made it so interesting. This got me thinking about if there were any Barbenheimer moments throughout gaming history. So today we're going to be taking a look back at weird video games released on the same day. The first set of games to release on the same day that came to mind for me was Animal Crossing New Horizons and Doom Eternal. This is a pretty famous one that I'm sure many of you remember. Both games released on March 20th, 2020, and this pairing definitely has a lot of that Barbenheimer energy, with one game featuring cute animals fishing and planting trees, while the other has demons getting their heads ripped off. Nintendo's Animal Crossing New Horizons is an example of a game that was released at the absolute perfect moment. The game was supposed to release in 2019, but Nintendo announced in June of that year that the game would be pushed back to its March release date. Ironically, that date ended up coinciding with the beginning of the pandemic, right around the time most people were getting told to stay home for the first time. Reportedly, the developers were initially disappointed that the game's release had fallen right alongside this. I guess maybe they were worried people would be unable to go out and get a copy, or they thought people would be too distracted by everything going on. Well, in the end, the exact opposite happened. New Horizons became a phenomenon after its release. For some, it was just convenient, with a brand new game releasing right around the time they were stuck at home with unlimited free time. For others, New Horizons became an escape during a trying time. As for the game itself, reception from hardcore fans has become increasingly critical in recent years. There are a lot of missing features that were present in prior entries, leading to less things to do in the game. Fans also feel Nintendo should have supported the game with updates for longer than they did. While I can understand this criticism, I actually think some of these missing features helped make the game easier to understand for new players. I can't even tell you how many people who don't play games I've heard say they got into Animal Crossing around this time. Its relaxing vibe, addictive daily routine gameplay loop, and interactivity between friends was exactly what people needed. It's no surprise that the game was able to draw in such a large audience and cater to those who rarely play games. As for a game that caters to the exact opposite group of people, you have the other game released on March 20th, 2020, Doom Eternal. Doom Eternal is the follow-up to Doom 2016, a game I absolutely love. However, I actually haven't played Eternal, so I can't say much. Eternal does seem similar to New Horizons in the sense that some of the more hardcore fans have found issues with it, but most people who played it came away happy. The game was a big success, reportedly outselling its predecessor. Clearly, everyone was happy with the direction of the franchise, as another Doom game titled Doom: The Dark Ages is set to be released in 2025. Okay, so most of you probably already knew about this pairing, right? It was a famous one with a lot of fan art and memes to go alongside it. How about we talk about some different weird games that released on the same day that you might not be so familiar with? First off, let's continue with the mature shooter game alongside a colorful kids game trend with The Order 1886 and Kirby and the Rainbow Curse, both released on February 20th, 2015 in North America. I've made a whole video about The Order 1886 that you can check out if you want to hear my full thoughts, but I'll briefly summarize. The Order 1886 was one of Sony's first premier games shown off for the PlayStation 4. Developed by Ready at Dawn, the game's stunning graphics made it look to be one of the first true next-gen experiences. Unfortunately, the game itself didn't quite live up to these expectations. The game can be finished in just a few hours, which was very off-putting to those shelling out $60 on launch day. As for what you got in those couple of hours, it is a very middle-of-the-road third-person shooter. It's a shame because I think the highs of this game are very high, but the highs are rare, even in such a short amount of time. Honestly, I don't hate this game in the way that some people do, and I really wish we could have gotten to see more out of this franchise. The game is begging for a sequel, with the story ending on a cliffhanger. And despite my issues with the game, I was enamored by the world and setting. I think a sequel that addressed all of the complaints while honing in more on the things that did work could have been fantastic. But we will never know, as Ready at Dawn's relationship with Sony crumbled after this game's failure. A few years later, they ended up being acquired by Oculus and making VR games. I've never played them because I'm not a VR guy, but apparently Ready at Dawn's VR games were among the best out there. Sadly though, this wasn't enough to save them from the great gaming purge of 2024, as they were shut down by Oculus on August 7th of this year. Another game that was also quite disappointing to me, although not exactly to the same extent, actually came out on the same day, with Kirby and the Rainbow Curse. Nearly 3 years into the Wii U's life cycle, we had yet to see an appearance from the pink puffball, Kirby. That finally changed with the release of Kirby and the Rainbow Curse. The game was set to be a sequel to the 2005 DS game titled Kirby Canvas Curse. You use the touchscreen to draw lines for Kirby to follow and interact with other elements of the game. Canvas Curse also incorporated the use of both screens, as the top screen acted as a map of sorts. Canvas Curse is a pretty fun, well-received game. It was a nice iteration from the usual Kirby formula. So expectations for the sequel were understandably somewhat high. The Wii U gamepad would allow for a similar touchscreen playstyle, making the game a perfect match. However, the game didn't quite pan out as we hoped. The art style is really great, with a claymation look that is unique from any other game in the franchise. Unfortunately though, that's about where the positives end, as the game is far too simple and easy to be fun for long periods of time. Also, the game just really doesn't make sense as a home console release. You have to look down at the gamepad to draw the lines for Kirby, and so you will quickly realize you're never actually looking up at the TV screen at all. There is a multiplayer mode that requires some players to look at the screen, but for whoever is controlling Kirby, the point stands that you can never really look away from the gamepad screen. To that point, this game seemed to suffer from what a lot of Wii U games, and really the Wii U console itself, struggled with, which was just a lack of understanding of how to use the gamepad effectively. I was always disappointed to see a Wii U game that just mirrored the game on both screens, and Kirby and the Rainbow Curse is one of many to do that. I understand why Rainbow Curse was a match with the gamepad touchscreen, but they didn't incorporate much to make it a match with the TV screen as well. What that led to was a game that really felt more fit for a portable console. It's not like I despise this game or anything, it's just not great. But the fact that this was Kirby's only release on Wii U makes this a whole lot worse. Okay, now let's mix it up a little bit. This next duo is not weird in the sense that the games are vastly different from one another. Rather, it's just extremely weird that some of the companies involved actually wanted the games to be released on the same day. Allow me to introduce you to Rise of the Tomb Raider and Fallout 4, both released on November 10th, 2015. Rise of the Tomb Raider had a bit of an odd development and release timeline. It is a sequel to the Tomb Raider reboot that was released in 2013. The reboot had been a bit controversial for fans of the original games, as it was quite different. It was much more action-oriented, going heavy on the third-person shooter style while neglecting the adventure roots of the franchise. However, for myself, who doesn't have a lot of experience with the originals and actually prefers this style of action game, I loved the reboot, so I eagerly anticipated its sequel. However, in a surprise move, it was announced that the game would be a timed exclusive to Xbox platforms, despite the prior game releasing on everything. Xbox shelled out a lot of money to make this game an exclusive, reportedly around $100 million. Now, buying exclusivity for certain games was nothing new during this era of gaming. I just find it pretty weird to pay for a sequel to be exclusive, rather than the start of something new. Take for example Titanfall, another game Xbox invested in during this era, as something that makes more sense to me. Regardless, Rise of the Tomb Raider was only going to release on Xbox, meaning the potential audience was naturally going to be smaller. With that in mind, you would think they would choose a release date that gave the game plenty of room to breathe and stand out. Well, they didn't do that. Instead, they released it on the same day as one of the most anticipated games of that year, Fallout 4 from Bethesda. Anytime a new Fallout or Elder Scrolls game comes out, it's an event that takes over the gaming world. In other words, you don't really want to compete with it. Fallout 4 continued the excellent Fallout franchise with another good installment. The game has gotten some hate over the years, and while I can see its flaws, I personally have always liked Fallout 4. Regardless of how you feel about the game, it was no doubt a smash hit, to no one's surprise. And while the internet went wild over Fallout 4, Rise of the Tomb Raider's launch went pretty under the radar. It's not all bad news though, as Rise of the Tomb Raider did manage to sell pretty well, especially once its timed exclusivity period was over and it was released everywhere. The game managed to sell nearly 12 million copies when it was all said and done, which is way more than I would have thought it did. So while Tomb Raider may have got overshadowed at launch, it had good legs and was able to become a big success in its own right. I guess that's proof that you can release alongside other big games and still be just fine. There's plenty of other examples of this as well. Speaking of big games launching on the same day, I'm not sure I can think of many bigger than Spider-Man 2 and Super Mario Bros. Wonder, both launching on October 20th, 2023. This one is recent, so it's fresh in my mind, and I gotta say, this might be one of my favorite gaming memories I've had in a while. These two games were both easily my top most anticipated games of 2023, so it was pretty funny to see they were coming out the same day. When I walked into the store to buy these, I felt like a kid in a candy shop. I know it's not really that big of a deal, but I don't know, man, it was just so fun picking up both of these games at the same time. And what's even more fun is that both of these games lived up to my lofty expectations. I've seen a facet of the more hardcore Spider-Man fans start to talk negatively about Spider-Man 2, but I just can't get behind that at all. The game was an absolute blast from start to finish. Refining everything I loved about Spider-Man PS4 and Miles Morales, it was exactly what I was hoping for. The symbiote Peter storyline was really cool, and I loved the two Spider-Man route they took with the story. The best compliment I can give this game is that the hours absolutely flew by while I played it. I remember after getting my platinum for the game, I saw the playtime and I couldn't believe it. As much as I love Spider-Man 2, I have to be honest and say I think I enjoyed its release date counterpart just a bit more. I think Super Mario Bros. Wonder is such an astounding game. It made me fall in love with 2D Mario all over again, bringing the creativity and uniqueness that modern audiences had become accustomed to only seeing in the 3D Mario games. Every single level in this game is different from the last. blast. I found myself constantly smiling the entire time I played the game as the developers threw every weird, fun, and out-of-this-world idea they could think of at me. I 100% completed the game and enjoyed every second of it. I've even considered going back and getting 100% on the other files. That's how much I loved Super Mario Bros. Wonder. For my personal taste, I'm not sure that we'll ever get a better single game release day than Spider-Man 2 and Super Mario Bros. Wonder. But that doesn't mean there aren't equally crazy days out there. And you know what? Forget 2 games releasing on the same day. Let's get crazy with it and go to 3 on the same day. The day is November 7th, 2006. You just bought your 3rd Xbox 360 after another Red Ring of Death, and it's time to play some brand new video games. 3 brand new video games, in fact. The first is a brand new IP from Xbox with Gears of War. Gears would go on to be a massive franchise for Xbox, even to this day. And it all started with this original entry. I find the first Gears to be a little bit hard to go back to now after the improvements of the second game, but it is still great. I will never forget the iconic trailer for the game, or the countless hours spent playing the campaign in split screen with my cousin. Gears was able to perfectly toe the line of being an over-the-top mega violent shooter while still telling an emotional story with characters that resonated with players. Gears of War, alongside the upcoming Halo games, helped make the Xbox 360 the place to play for most of the 7th generation of consoles. Once you were done mowing down the Locust, it was time to pull out those plastic guitars, as Guitar Hero 2 was also released the same day. I think it's easy for modern audiences to forget just how big Guitar Hero was at this time. It was legitimately one of the most popular and influential games ever. Sadly for me, my parents were very against the idea of buying giant instrument peripherals, so I never got to own these games, but I spent so much time playing them at friends' houses over the years that I may as well have. There was something so uniquely appealing about Guitar Hero, something that managed to draw in just about everybody. People who had never played video games before understood it and enjoyed it, and likewise, people who knew nothing about music and instruments were able to play it as well. That's an incredible accomplishment, and something that I think these developers deserve a lot more credit for. Guitar Hero was in its prime in this era, consistently being one of the best-selling video games every year, but the 3rd game released on this day was from a franchise that was still in its infancy. Before Call of Duty was a mega franchise that makes billions of dollars every year, the franchise was primarily just known as a World War II series. Call of Duty 3 was set to be another installment taking place during the same time period. Despite coming 1 year before the revolution that would be Call of Duty 4 Modern Warfare, COD 3 was still highly successful in its own right. The game had sold over 1 million copies by the end of 2006. Once again, we see an example of 3 giant games releasing all on the same day that were each able to have a lot of success. I think what I'm learning here is that for the most part, launching alongside other big games isn't necessarily the death wish that we assume it is. Considering there were 3 games on this day and they all came from big franchises, you probably think it can't get crazier than this. But I've got one more for you. This is a very interesting one, as November 22nd, 2013 saw the release of 3 major games all from the same company. For whatever reason, Nintendo chose to release their 3 biggest games of the 2013 holiday season on the same day here in North America, with Super Mario 3D World on Wii U alongside The Legend of Zelda: A Link Between Worlds and Mario Party Island Tour on 3DS. I always found it to be pretty weird that they did this. It's one thing to have 2 completely different games released on the same day because the audiences aren't competing, but these games all theoretically have the same audience, of course being Nintendo fans. I would assume Nintendo did this simply because they needed to make sure all of these games were out in time for the holiday shoppers. They were willing to take a launch day hit on some of the sales if it meant that they were on the shelves in time for that. That makes total sense, but doing this probably forced some people to make a choice between the games that they wouldn't have had to make otherwise if the releases were more spread out. I mean, that's exactly what happened to me. I was young at this time, and while my parents were very generous with the games they would buy me, there was no way I was getting away with 3 games in one day. So I had to make a choice and went with Super Mario 3D World. I had to wait until Christmas for Zelda, and by that point, Mario Party had fallen to the wayside, and I never even ended up getting that game. While I understand why Nintendo did this with the context of the holidays, I do wonder if these decisions hurt some of these games. In the case of Super Mario 3D World, it was one of the first major Wii U releases, and it was a game that had a lot of pressure on its shoulders to try and save the struggling console. Nintendo needed to go all in with this game and make people who weren't buying Wii U's feel compelled to run out and do so. But instead, they essentially gave people an alternative. Sure, it sucks to not be able to play the brand new Mario game, but hey, I can just buy the new Zelda game for the console I already have. I'm not trying to say the Wii U's fate would have been different if a 3DS Zelda game was released on a different day. I'm just curious how things may have been affected. Ultimately, the game that suffered the most here was actually Mario Party Island Tour. That game has basically been completely forgotten. Part of the reason for that is simply because it's just kind of not great, but this release date trio certainly didn't help, and weirdly enough, it's been forgotten even in the context of this trio. When researching for this video, I constantly saw people mentioning 3D World and Link Between Worlds releasing on the same day, and no one was even mentioning the fact that Island Tour was also there. Anyways, 3 major Nintendo games released all on the same day. Pretty crazy, right? Well, hey, what if I told you that November 22nd, 2013 is also the same day that the Xbox One console launched in North America? So that's right, a new Mario game, new Zelda game, new Mario Party, and a brand new Xbox all on the same day. I can remember going into GameStop that day to pick up my copy of 3D World, and the energy in there was crazy. So many people from such different audiences picking up games and consoles. It was a lot of fun. Based on my research, I am ready to call November 22nd, 2013 the craziest single day for game releases ever. I'm not sure how you can top 3 major Nintendo games and a new Xbox console all in the same day. I hope you enjoyed this quick little video that I thought would be fun to make. I'm not so sure there was any real conclusion here other than it's fun when games release on the same day, and it was fun to reminisce about them. If you made it this far, please leave a like and subscribe. It really helps out the channel. And let me know in the comments if there are any other same day release date games that I missed in this video.